the warrior ethos, coaching, and therapy. This is Warrior Leadership. This is Warrior Leadership. I'm back in the house here with DB the therapist, and today we have a topic that we're going to talk about that's called cultivating gratitude in the face of trauma. Before we get into our conversation, I'm going to go over just the quick promotion. So Warrior Leadership is brought to you by Victory Leadership Coaching, home of the Warrior Leadership Coaching certification and first-time leaders course for new managers. Don't forget to check us out at victoryleadershipcoaching.com. You can also buy our books at amazon.com. The books are Why Organizations Should Develop Their Leaders, a pocket guide, and Warrior Leadership, the journey from coach to entrepreneur. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe to all of our videos on YouTube channel and Spotify channel and wherever you're seeing this today. All right, so that's done. DB, how you doing today, brother?
I'm good, man. Good. Happy to talk about some gratitude today, man.
We're going to talk about some gratitude and trauma. That's
it.
So gratitude in the face of trauma. So from a therapy perspective, what does that mean to you?
So I think for me, from a therapeutic perspective, gratitude really has to do with, life can have so many ups and downs, and there's these this idea, these were the best of times, these were the worst of times, and sometimes we need to look at not just the negative aspect of those worst times, but be able to reframe and look at those things and pull out the positives from those experiences. And I think it's hard to do that, right? Because it's so easy to color our experiences with negative, and just being able to take a step back and really pull apart our stories and our narratives is so important. And one of the tools that I use to do that it's called a trauma narrative. And I help people go back and basically rewrite their story, which in my mind, when we're rewriting our story, we're rewiring our brains. And then we're rewiring our brains, then we can open ourselves up to have that gratitude that's necessary. But when our brains are wired with that trauma, we're going to have these mindsets that attempt to protect ourselves from harm. But the truth is that it's not really protecting us. It's keeping us isolated. But then it doesn't allow us to have gratitude and other things as well. But that's the perspective that I would take.
I agree. And when we talk about reframing, which is what our last episode was on, this is kind of taking a deeper look into trauma and a deeper look into why people aren't grateful for their current situation. And I think a lot of this has to do with mindfulness. So having the ability to, you just got done mentioning the trauma narrative. So people actually, understanding what's happening in the moment, being able to put it on paper, and then you go through and help them rewrite it. But also to figure that out, sometimes it's really, really difficult to put yourself in that moment. So maybe learning how to meditate or learning how to just focus on your breathing for a couple minutes and bring yourself down from whatever negative stuff is going on in your life, and figuring out a way to understand it through understanding where your feet are, understanding how you're sitting in your chair, understanding how your breath is going in and out, and then really taking another look at things while you're calm,
right,
to figure out what's actually happening. Because all we think of when something is traumatic or negative is how bad it is. This is horrible. This bill is never going to get paid. I'm never going to have enough money for that. This is all bad. And so we're not, when we think in that level, we're not really grateful for the lesson that can be learned with whatever that situation is. And so from a leadership perspective, You know, when you think of the workplace, how often do things go wrong? Well, if you're going to be that confident, valuable leader in the workplace, you need to understand how to bring yourself back to center, which is emotional intelligence. It's one of the aspects of it, and understand that there's a lesson to be learned in everything, and get yourself in the mindset to be able to deal with that, so that when your employees start coming up to you and asking you questions, you're able to deal with that instead of just living in this constant state of stress.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because I pulled up this article, ahead of our talk here, and it's about this very topic that we're discussing. And I want to just read something that I thought, really is, on point with what we're talking about right now, which is, it says gratitude can be very beneficial when it's possible. However, while some trauma survivors can benefit from gratitude, for most, it's extremely challenging. And it says it's because of an overactive nervous system. And so when you just talked about the breathing techniques, that's what that's about. When sometimes, like, I think we always, as humans, we want people to have the attitude of gratitude today. Like, have an attitude of gratitude today, suck it up and drive on. Everyone has a hard life. I think that's the kind of advice that most people would give in certain situations. What this is saying is, for the majority of people, their nervous system, they've been so overwhelmed with trauma that, they need to have that moment where they can breathe and ground themselves over and over again consistently for a period of time, to where the gratitude, they can start to have that mindset of gratitude. So I think it's in the society that we live in, where we live in a microwave society where we want people to heal today. We're all about, hey, evidence-based practice and training, and 10 or 12 sessions, now you're fixed and now you're healed because we walked you through these modules. Well, that's a problem. I take issue with it sometimes, because of the simple fact that all human beings are not wired that way. I remember when I first came back from Iraq, and I went through this evidence-based CBT at the VA earlier on. This was like in 2000, and I want to say 2007, 2008. And this psychologist, he took me through these modules, and I'm gonna be honest with you, it was like I was telling him what I needed to say to him in order for him to say, okay, you're good, Mr. Brown. You can go. My scores on my PCL5 started to come down, because I felt like I was being coached and coerced into saying that I'm okay. Well, the problem with that was, years later, I discovered that the trauma is so deep rooted that he hadn't addressed it all in those 12 sessions that he had with me. But in his mind, because those measures that he took, said that my score was reduced, and I kept telling him that I was okay, that he really assumed that I was okay. Well, the truth is that, trauma can be so deep rooted in us that it just takes time. And sometimes that's not necessarily, I'm not saying more time in the therapy room. I'm actually just saying more time with allowing life to happen, and for you to have more protective factors outside of counseling, meaning connection with family and friends, exercising. You just mentioned breathing techniques, writing. There's all these things that we can do in life to heal, and it just takes time, Coach. I think it takes, and I love the word choice that you use, cultivating gratitude, right? Cultivating. So, Coach, you understand farming and gardening to a degree. Break that down. This whole idea of cultivating gratitude, cultivating.
So maybe it starts with not necessarily gratitude, but just positivity as a whole.
Okay.
So when you unpack the saying cultivating gratitude, I think it starts with with understanding that positivity and looking at the positive in a situation is probably more important than the gratitude itself at first, because it's really, really hard to be thankful to be thankful for a situation or to be positive about a situation if you can't see the positive in anything. If you're constantly living in this state of everything is so horrible, woe is me, this is happening to me, it's not happening for me, it's just bad, I'm broke because it's your fault, this is happening and it's your fault. If that's constantly the way that you're looking at it, there are exercises that will help people with this. I did this at different workplaces. I've done it off and on here in my own household, and it's just an exercise called Hunt the Good Stuff, where you sit down and when we would have our work meetings at the beginning of every day before we would start our shifts, we would say, hey, what's something great that happened yesterday, and we would all talk about it. And we would go around to my 12-person team, and each person would say something that went great. And then we would talk about, what type of improvements we could make in our job. And then we would do our exercises, and then we would go to work. Now at home, we would do that after school. What's something good that happened today? And though that sounds super cheesy and super annoying, it really, really is at first. But then what happens is it's just like going to exercise. You talked about exercising. Well, guess what? Your brain is a muscle. And so what you're doing when you do this sort of exercise is you're teaching yourself how to look for good things. And then in order to cultivate the gratitude, well, now you need to teach people that when the negative things happen, well, remember that exercise we did called Hunt the Good Stuff? Figure out what went right, not just what went wrong, and what you can learn from what just happened. And then, you do that for a little while, and get people thinking more positive. And then that's when you can say, well, now what are you going to do to fix it? And once you go in steps, you get people thinking positive first. You teach people how to reframe a negative to a positive. That's second. And then you teach them how to turn that into action. And that's third. And once you do that, automatically gratitude happens because they see the positive in every situation.
Yeah. Yeah. That's powerful, man. I love that. And I'm borrowing that, by the way. Hunt for positive for the good stuff, right?
Yep.
Hunting for the good stuff. I love the idea. Again, hunting. It gives you it gives you this understanding that it's not going to be easy to find the positive. It's not going to be easy, but I love the intentionality about the exercise, which is, and that's something for me. You could set up a SMART goal around that. Like, look, every day we're going to intentionally hunt for the good stuff. And I think when you practice that, and on an individual level, right, when you're intentional about saying, at the end of every day, I'm going to hunt for one good thing that happened today. I'm going to document that throughout my week. Now, at the end of the week, you take all, and I'm big on journaling. I'm pushing it, right? At the end of the week, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to take all 5 or 7 of those positive things, and I'm going to string that together, and I'm going to write a little paragraph or something about overall how my week was based on all of those things. And look, if you do that for 52 weeks, man, you have a whole lot of data to back up. And I love that. Like, you have so much data to back up. All right, that's why I'm grateful in spite of whatever else happened outside of us. Like, we cannot change the outside things that happen to us in our lives, but this hunting for positivity to build and cultivate gratitude, I think you're on to something there, Coach. I think that's a great strategy, man. It really is, because it's so easy to. I don't think you have to hunt for negativity. It's like it's right there. It's like a
Always.
carcass. It's like a carcass on the road, like, and that's like right there. It's so easy to access, and it's like, let's go past that carcass on the road and let's go out there and let's go out there and actually hunt for something good. Let's go out there and find it. You
Yep.
know, and that's cool, man. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna try that, and I'm gonna post. When I hunt and find something good, I'm gonna post it.
Hey, you should piss off your wife and do that every night for dinner. I like it. Anyway, maybe I'll start doing it too again. She knows it because that's an old story. We've been doing that for a long time. No, but it does work. And, as annoying as it can be to infuse that into a conversation, and it feels like well, because it's intentional, it feels forced. But when you continuously do it, it turns into a fun thing after a while. And then there's that expectation. It's almost like going into a coaching session where oh crap, well, today JJ's going to mention that I have to figure out something good that happened yesterday or something good that happened throughout the day. And so you come to the table with that thing. And instead of being put Johnny on the spot, now you know that this is something you have to figure out every day. And then it's a fun thing to talk about instead of something that is forced. And
Right.
you kind of, and after a while, I remember when I was doing it before, the kids would actually be like, well, aren't we going to talk about the good thing that happened today? And it turns into a fun thing.
Yeah. And again, we started by saying we're talking about cultivating gratitude. It's like, dude, think about this. At the end of our lives, people are going to come to our funerals and they're going to say good things about us. Some people might say bad things about us, but the gratitude, and man, I remember when my dad used to do this. Remember when my mom used to do this, right? The gratitude is developed over a long period of time, and that's being able to consistently do a certain thing. And so, like, although something might seem corny and cheesy at a particular time, you're going to appreciate that later. You will always appreciate those little things that annoy you and that irk you. But it's just like you said, it's a muscle that has to be worked. And because we know we have to cultivate gratitude, there has to be intentionality behind it. It has to be.
Right. Well, and so the whole topic is cultivating gratitude in the face of trauma. And so we're not talking about just average things that happen in day-to-day life here. We're talking about a situation that could potentially be an underlying feeling that could create an underlying feeling that happens every single time something gets hard, because in that moment when it hit, it was just so, I mean, it hits your central nervous system. It hits your fight or flight, and you tensed up, and you're having a hard time dealing with it. And so when it comes to trauma, it's an extreme situation. It's not just, oh, the bills didn't get paid this month, and now we have to figure out how to get that money. As traumatic as that could be, I don't exactly think that that's what we're referring to here. And so when you think about that, now that trauma is infused into every negative situation that happens. And so you got to get to the root cause of that. And you can't really do that without talking about it. And sometimes people won't talk about it until you get them to open up, and cultivating gratitude is one way to get people to be comfortable with you, because in order to be grateful for a counseling session, a conversation, a good situation that's actually happened in your life, there has to be trust with the person that you're having that conversation with.
Mm-hmm.
And trauma is hard to dig into. And so you got to create that first.
Yeah. And thank you for reinforcing that, because it's not just the normal. I think most people that aren't necessarily dealing with trauma, they don't have an issue with cultivating gratitude. Their mindset is gratitude. They have that mindset, and it's normal for them to go to that. But for someone that's experiencing trauma, that's not their default way of thinking. It is going to be a very negative, pessimistic mindset. And so really trying to, and I think the truth is, and I don't know the exact number on this, but it'd be interesting to just know, like, in our society, in our world, how many people are dealing with underlying trauma. I'm not saying they're diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder necessarily, but they have underlying trauma that they're dealing with, or situations that have gone on that cause trauma, and that's what's blocking them from having gratitude. Because we know, and we can definitely get into and talk about the benefits of having a mindset of gratitude, like, because that's really, like, if we're like, I think this is what goes off in my mind, coach, and what I would ask you is like, why do I even care about gratitude? What's the benefit in it for me? What is the benefit, you know?
Well, I love that you brought that up. I mean, when you look at life through the lens of growth mindset, I think that's really where gratitude comes in, because then everything is not happening to you. It's actually happening for you, because you can actually see that there's a lesson to be learned somewhere in every negative situation. And when you can get to that point, I mean, you're not going to settle with all the negativity, which also means that if you've been poor your whole life, you're not going to settle for that anymore. You're going to figure out how to not be poor. And then if you've been dealing with an abusive relationship with one of your parents, well, you're not going to deal with that abusive relationship anymore. You're going to move on for that and surround yourself with people that want to boost you up. And that's kind of how success happens financially and in the business world. But you know, when you can cultivate that mindset of gratitude where things don't happen to you, they happen for you, and figure out how to grow from that, that's really kind of a stepping stone to making sure that you're able to get to a place where you can be happy in life.
Man, I love that. That is, when we talk about a reframe, this is happening for me and not to me.
Yep.
That's empowerment, and it's a strength based perspective. And I think that just the thought in it of itself and affirming that is how how we cultivate gratitude. I remember one of the things that I've learned how to do is to ask a question. Even if something is bad and it's happening bad to me, is it effective for me to think about how bad that thing is and how powerless I am to that thing? Because is that like, and and some people might get upset with me with saying this, because, but for me, even if structural racism exists, right, and this is a big topic, how is that helping me from looking at life and saying there's structural racism and there's nothing that I could do about it?
You know,
Right? I think there's no benefit. There is no benefit to, and I'm talking about on an individual level, for me to say that there's this huge force out there and there's nothing that I can do as an individual to overcome that. And I think that in our society, and I'm using that as an example because it's one that stands out. It comes up so much, and there's a lot of trauma associated with that. But for me, I've never allowed myself to feed that, to fuel that mindset that there's this structure. And I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, and that's why I was careful and even bringing that out, because people get real, they just get crazy about this thing, as if I'm saying structural racism isn't there. It may or may not be, but I'm not going to spend every waking moment of my day focusing on that and then allowing fear to set in. And that's where I want it to go to, because fear will stand in the way for me cultivating the mindset necessary for me to move forward in life. And I think that's with anything.
well, and I'm the typical white guy, so people can take this with a grain of salt if they want to, but I think they should listen to it. So Morgan Freeman and Samuel L. Jackson both said that if you look for the racism, you will find the racism. But if you look for the good in people and you don't expect the racism to come, then you can have genuine, great conversations without any judgment at all. And that's kind of how you solve this systemic racism, because so many people are talking about how this is happening to them. I can't do this because of the white man or whatever the case may be. But if they look internally, they're probably controlling more of those factors themselves, because they're the only ones that have control over their own environment. If they blame other people, they're going to be stuck where they are. And when it comes to having a conversation with somebody, it's easy for you to look at me and say, because I made a joke that could potentially be racist, that I must be racist. But is that always true, or is it just me saying some dumb stuff? I'm serious. Well,
no, yeah,
because it's easy to say that.
right.
If you expect it, then it exists. If you don't expect it, then it's likely to fall to the wayside, and less people are even going to care.
Right. And coach, I'm gonna bring it out since we already there. It's just like right before we got on the call in the studio, right? Because we joke with each other. And so I said, here I am, I'm back, and you're like the plague, and then all of a sudden, right? Let's be real, like we were already talking about it. So like, right, and you said like the plague, and then in my mind, I was joking. I was like, oh, like the black plague, and so. And look, you know this better than anybody. Like in the military, man, it's no holds bar with the joking, with the race jokes, with the religion jokes, all those things. And at the end of the day, like you start to realize it's like, you know what? Sometimes, to your point, I think that reveals the trauma on the inside of a person. Like if that bothers you so much, you really need to go to the core of your core and figure out like, okay, what is it about me that bothers me so much? Because for me, I didn't take offense to it. And I'm not saying that I just let people say whatever and all these other things, but the number of people that are ready to just go to war over a statement that somebody made, it's like, it's just like that. Again, we're talking about cultivating gratitude in the face of trauma. I think what this conversation is bringing out is like, so many people have unresolved trauma and they don't even realize it. You know what I'm saying?
You know
it's
what?
A whole other conversation.
And I know you brought the example out of systemic racism, but we could talk about money. Money causes trauma. I mean, car accidents. Sometimes people can't get back in their vehicle.
Right.
When it comes to interpersonal relationships, it could be that maybe a female has dated a few men who were controlling and forced sexual situations or whatever the case may be, and so they don't date anymore. I mean, there are so many things that can cause trauma, and that trauma can solidify in a lot of different ways. Sometimes if a person has say a white gal dates a lot of dark-skinned guys or Mexican guys or whatever, and those guys were the damaging ones, well, now they may look at every single person of that race as a bad person. And is that racism or is that trauma? I mean, I don't think that's racism. That in that situation, it's probably trauma.
Right.
But because she's white, what does that look like?
And oh man, oh, that's good. And you know, it's the optics of it, right? So from the outside looking in, it may look one way. Like I've had situations like that like that's just like, you know, if a person grows up in a certain neighborhood and they're surrounded by the other group, and you know, that same dynamic that you're talking about, it's like, you know, I had this friend growing up, his name was Corey, man. He white dude, and he was a basketball player, and Corey was one of us because he grew up in our neighborhood. And so it's like we didn't look at him any differently at all, because at the end of the day, man, I think it comes down to this, man. A person's character matters more than anything. And so like when we are able to like look past, and I want to make sure we stay on the topic, but I just want to just bring this point home, is like when we're able to look past like just the external appearance and we go into a person's character, we can also see that, and this again, talking about trauma, our trauma was what builds our character, man. And so like I encourage people to like stop looking away from your trauma, like embrace that. And whatever those situations you've gone through in your life, embrace it. So like for me, the reason why I brought Corey up, clearly he's living in the same neighborhood that we're living in because he's going through the same psychosocial issues that we go through. Because if not, he would be living in a wealthier neighborhood. That taught me a lot as a kid. It was like, why is this kid? Matter of fact, he lived in a trailer. Like we all lived in houses, apartments. Corey lived in a trailer with his mom. I'm not putting his last name out there, but it's like for me, I was like, this kid is growing up amongst us. And if I remember correctly, his dad wasn't in his life. It was just him and his mom, and they lived in the trailer. And so, like, who are we to like look past him because of his external shell? And like, you know, in some instances, Corey would have got bullied. He would have got beat up just because he was the wrong color and we were the dominant group. But like, we embraced him. Like, we played ball with them, we hung out with them, and we accepted them as our own. And I think that, like, you know, again, it's looking past this external shell and like connecting with people because of that sort of, you like, man, okay, they went through something internally and they've overcome some stuff. And so like, you know, be willing to like cultivate that trauma on the inside of you to get towards that, cultivate that mindset of gratitude to get the trauma, because people respect that and they see that and they'll gravitate towards you, is the point I was trying to make.
Yeah. You know, you saying that brought up a statement that an old first sergeant of mine used to say all the time. He said, "Always take the hard right, not the easy left." And you know, when I think about that, and it comes to, you know, everything happening to you and not everything to you rather than for you, or for you rather than to you, and you take it in the context and what we're talking about. Really, it's just being able to have genuine conversations with other people without any judgment. And and you know, not judging them for, you know, the clothes that they're wearing or the way they look or the neighborhood that they grew up in or whatever the case may be, because we all have a different background that makes us who we are. And just because we're from a certain place doesn't mean we act a certain way. And so, you know, when it comes to the way you accepted that gentleman, I think that it's definitely important to understand it was because you guys just saw another guy that wanted to go out and shoot hoops, and you brought him in and said, "Let's go."
Yep. And by the way, Corey had gear too.
I bet you.
That boy was clean, man. He used to have Jordans and Tommy Hilfiger, Nautica. Like he was like, man, he was laced, honestly. Like it was one of those things, like, all right, this the homie. Like, he cool. We used to go to his house, play video games and eat, and just like, yeah, he was cool, man. And you know, it's interesting because it's like that the same dynamic that we have. And I've always been open. And I think that's why our relationship works the way that it does, is because the thing that we're talking about right now, we do that. Like,
Yeah.
we are willing to go within ourselves and cultivate it, which means that you got to get your hands dirty. You got to look, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable cultivating. Think about it. Cultivating comes from, and I wanted you to dig into this, but I'll get there. Is like, I'll go in there. Cultivating is like farming. And how many people want to go farm?
Yeah. Well, I did go there. You know, I didn't necessarily go into the analogy, but when it comes to farming, when you're digging and hunting for the good stuff, you're basically.
Oh yeah, you said hunting. You're right.
Yeah. But it's okay. It doesn't matter. But basically, you have to create something.
Yeah.
Out of nothing.
There you go. Yeah.
And you know, if we have a seed and dirt, I mean, a seed and dirt doesn't do anything unless you nurture it. And so really what we're talking about here is taking the positive stuff, which exists already, just like that seed and just like that dirt. But I mean, you can't just toss the seed in the ground with no water and expect that seed to grow. So what you have to do is add in the good stuff, which the good stuff is the water. and you continue to make sure you pay attention to that, which is hunting the good stuff, always hunting for that positivity so that you can cultivate that gratitude in your life. But I think that it's important to understand that if you don't look for it, it's not going to be there, even though it still exists.
My bad. I wanted you to end it like that, maybe.
It's all good. But hey, man, before we end this, because we're a few minutes over our 30 minutes, did you have anything that you wanted to share real quick with the audience?
No, I think I would just say, this is the holiday time, so this is definitely the time where, a lot of people are walking around happy holidays, right? And not realizing that some people may or may not be having a happy holiday. Sometimes the holidays for some of us is very hard and challenging, and in these moments, you want to talk about cultivating gratitude. It's hard to cultivate gratitude during the winter months and the holidays for some of us, and so just be mindful of that is what I would say. And sometimes just that encouraging word could be that spark or that seed, right? That helps someone get there. So just be mindful of that is what I would say.
All year round.
Mm-hmm.
You never know when somebody's having a hard time. So make sure you're always saying positive things to as many people as you possibly can, because that one word could be the difference between a horrible day to a good day, a suicidal day to another day of life, whatever the case may be. Kindness goes a long way. But thank you for sharing that. And it is the holiday season, so make sure from a leadership coaching perspective, executive coaching, that you're treating your people well, because just because you are in that management position, you may be able to afford things. That doesn't necessarily mean that they can. And so provide support and at least create that environment that's good for them as you go into the holiday season, so that, everybody can actually enjoy it. But yeah, that's it. Wherever you're seeing this, please like it, subscribe to it, reshare it. But if it's important, but if you find that this information is important, please put a comment below so we can keep the conversation going. And don't forget to subscribe to the Spotify and YouTube channel when you see this there. Thanks, DB. We're going to be doing this again soon. But thank you for the audience for watching wherever you're seeing this.